Welcome, everyone. So glad we're all here. Today's explainer is diving into something absolutely crucial for us as a leadership team, our long-term financial health and operational integrity. We're actually going to look at this through a pretty wild cautionary tale, the deeply predatory world of merchant cash advances. It's intense, but by dissecting how these external financial traps are built, we can effectively hold a mirror up to our own organization. We'll evaluate our internal culture, our financial architecture, and just make totally sure we're building on a solid foundation of true integrity instead of, a hidden architecture of despair. Let's get right into it.
All right, picture this scene with me. It's 3 a.m. An exhausted business owner is just sitting there at their desk, practically paralyzed with panic because they're behind on payroll. Suddenly, ping, a notification hits. The wire transfer lands. And in that split second, there's this massive wave of relief, right? Payroll is going to be met. But then, as the source material vividly describes, there's this very specific, heavy silence that follows. It's like a held breath. It's the slow sinking realization that the momentary relief of this cash injection, it's a total illusion, because the number they signed on that contract wasn't the real number they're going to end up paying.
Which brings us to this incredibly powerful quote from our source material: "Desperation is a terrible advisor." As a leadership team, we really need to internalize this one. The article points out that predatory lending teaches a brutal lesson. Making decisions from a place of scarcity, panic, or just poor cash flow management, that's a massive risk, no matter the scale of your business. Now, usually, the deep wound of a financial crisis kind of forces a painful honesty that leads to restoration. But here's the thing, we want to build that rock-solid foundation before any crisis hits, right? And we do that by recognizing upfront that desperation fundamentally distorts our executive decision-making.
Okay, so Section 1, the architecture of desperation. Let's really dive into the actual mechanics here. How exactly are these debt traps built, and what can we learn from them to ensure we never let anything even remotely similar infect our own financial operations?
Well, it all starts with some very clever linguistic tricks. A merchant cash advance, or MCA, is deliberately never marketed as a loan. No way. By legally framing the whole transaction as a purchase of future receivables, this structure entirely sidesteps usury laws. And usury laws, those are the essential regulations that cap interest rates at levels resembling actual sanity. They're designed to protect businesses from predatory lending. But by just tweaking the vocabulary, the underlying financial reality is completely obscured. As leaders, this is a huge reminder for us. Absolute transparency in our own financial terminology, it's not just nice to have, it's absolutely critical.
Now, let's look at the brutal reality hiding behind that terminology. An MCA might be sold with a factor rate of 1.4. To a panicked, desperate mind, 1.4 sounds, well, almost gentle. But when you translate that into an annual percentage rate, an APR, that rate can easily blow right past 100%. Seriously, sometimes even considerably higher. It is an incredibly manipulative mathematical deception, and it's specifically designed to exploit a business owner's lack of clarity right in their peak moment of crisis.
Let's walk through how this relentless cycle actually plays out. The industry actually calls this stacking. Step 1, the first advance is taken. Step 2, unforgiving daily or maybe weekly automatic withdrawals begin. And let me tell you, those withdrawals do not pause for a slow week or if an employee gets sick. They just keep hitting. Step 3, these relentless debits start tearing massive new holes in the business's cash flow, which inevitably leads to Step 4. A second advance is literally layered or stacked right on top of the first one, just to cover the massive shortfall created by that original advance. The source even notes that brokers sometimes outright encourage this. Why? Because their commission doesn't depend on whether the borrower's business actually survives the year. It's wild.
That brings us to Section 2, stripping the relational covenant. We're going to shift gears here from the cold, ruthless math of these agreements to the philosophical core of the issue.
The source material introduces a really fascinating historical lens using this text. The wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteous is gracious and gives. Now, usually we read this as a moral indictment of the borrower, right? Like shame on them for not paying it back. But if you look at it from the other direction, it actually assumes a world where lending is fundamentally an active relationship. It assumes there's a shared, mutual understanding of what a person can actually bear to repay in the first place.
You see, historically, lending assumed a shared community and a shared fate. Think about the ancient prohibitions against usury found in texts like Exodus and Leviticus. They specifically forbade charging interest to the poor among you. That phrase, among you, is the whole key here. It meant the lender and the borrower belonged to the exact same community. Their futures were tied together.
Lending was an act of mutual support and shared survival. It wasn't just a transaction.
But predatory lending, it operates on the exact opposite of that historical model. There's no real underwriting. There's absolutely zero conversation about the actual health of the business or any real assessment of survivability. Speed and access completely replace relationship and shared fate. And look, to someone facing a terrifying Friday payroll, speed feels like mercy. But predatory funding deliberately manufactures distance, ensuring that the lender's fate never ever has to be shared with the borrower. As an executive team, we have to constantly ask ourselves, are our own internal and external systems creating a shared fate? Or are we, maybe unintentionally, manufacturing distance from our stakeholders?
All right, moving into Section 3, Math versus Mindset. Let's pivot towards solutions here and look at a critical distinction for long-term organizational health. There are some incredible community development, financial institutions, and nonprofit lenders out there doing great work to help businesses extract themselves from these traps. But they highlight a vital head versus heart distinction. On one side, you have restructuring a debt. That's just changing the math, getting a lower effective rate or a fixed term, maybe weekly payments. It's a purely mechanical fix. On the other side, though, you have restoring integrity. This changes the relationship itself. It's a deep, incredibly necessary shift that requires absolute transparency, a true, rock-solid command of your numbers, and creating the cultural safety to actually ask for help long before a crisis hits. Because here's the hard truth. Fixing the math without changing the nervous system's relationship to scarcity, that almost always leads the business right back into the exact same trap. The source article explicitly warns that an organization can refinance their way out of immediate danger. They can magically fix the spreadsheet. But if the underlying culture of desperation, scarcity, and avoidance is still there, they are going to find themselves right back in a similar crisis maybe 18 months later. For us as a leadership team, the takeaway is crystal clear. Operational fixes are completely useless if our cultural mindset is still rooted in panic. Which leads perfectly into our final section, Section 4, Restoring True Financial Integrity. How do we take all these heavy lessons and actually apply them to our own governance and financial strategy?
Well, the ethical funders mentioned in the source material model some brilliant principles that we as leaders really need to adopt. Honestly, they practice something that looks a lot closer to pastoral care than traditional finance. First off, they require an honest, unflinching look at the books, which is sometimes the first time the business has done that in years. Second, they ask what happened, not to point fingers or assign blame, but because understanding the real story is essential to structuring a real solution. Third, they build in actual slack. Think revenue-tied payments. This communicates, through the very architecture of the agreement, that they actually trust the business owner. Real integrity requires us to foster this exact kind of transparent relationship internally. We need to design systems that operate on basic trust, instead of treating our own teams or clients as adversaries.
So, let's bring it all together. We've seen exactly how the architecture of despair operates, right? Using speed, tricky language, and a total lack of relationship to trap businesses in a never-ending cycle of scarcity. So, as we evaluate our own long-term financial health today, I want to leave you with this final, provocative question to kind of guide our upcoming strategic planning. Is our financial architecture built on shared integrity, or are we just one crisis away from desperation? I want you to think really deeply about the transparency of our systems, the way we handle our numbers, and the culture we're fostering every single day. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, everyone. I absolutely cannot wait to see the discussions this sparks.